If you don't have a good idea of what a good life looks like, a good life is one in which I have more money. Money is so quantifiable. It's so easy to just say, right now I'm making $20 an hour. I want to get to 25. That it becomes this thing where we chase money because it's so easy to measure. You cannot go through life doing okay without knowing anything about money. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how you think about money. It's about how you behave. And behavior is in everybody's control. Nobody cares about the driver, but they want to be the driver because then they think people will care about them. And that goes for your ugly stuff, for your insecurities, and what you might think other people will really admire you for. Your ability to feel wealthy, to feel rich, to be financially independent is absolutely in your control. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, how much money you make, what your job is, you can do it. If you wake up in the morning and you feel a little bit empty or diminished or anxious or in pain, that you can tell yourself, if only I had more money, those problems would go away. But what you see with a lot of rich people is that once they gain the money, they still had a lot of problems in their life. And that can be such a jarring feeling because you told yourself, if only my net worth is X dollars, then I'll be good. And you get there and you're like, wait a minute, my friendships still aren't that great. My health is still not great. My marriage is still not that great. I still don't sleep at night. I still have all these anxieties. And so then you kind of lose your sense of hope or you double down. And so a lot of people are like, once my net worth is $1 million, I'll be great. And then you get there and you're like, well, I feel the same. So maybe it's 2 million. And you get there and you're like, I feel the same. Maybe it's 10 million. And you're just constantly chasing the high that you think you're going to get from it. Money can solve a lot of problems in your life, but this is another area that we just overestimate what it can do for you. So much of financial advice and financial media is based off of two things. A, lectures, and B, formulas. Nobody's interested in being told that they're living a wrong life, and nobody wants a formula that is indistinguishable from like algebra 1 in high school kind of thing. They don't want that. Finance is one of very few topics that affects everybody. No matter who you are, where you're from, money will impact your life. Health is the other one. You can go through life just fine knowing nothing about chemistry and have a great life. You cannot go through life doing okay without knowing anything about money. And this is where a lot of people get thrown off in finance, where we associate people who do well financially with big brain intellectuals. Harvard MBA, worked at Goldman Sachs, hedge fund manager. We assume that's who's going to be the best. And I think that can be true, but there's also, in a way that exists in almost no other field, you have a complete nobody living in the middle of nowhere, no education, no background, no connections, who does amazing financially because they have the right behaviors. They're calm, they're patient, they lack a big ego. They have a couple of behavioral traits, even if they know nothing about money, and that's all they need to do. And on the flip side of that, you can have the Harvard MBA hedge fund manager who blows himself up financially. Or even if they don't blow themselves up, they are actually living paycheck to paycheck. You don't need intelligence and connections and education and experience to do well. All you need is like a couple of behavioral attributes, patience, low ego. That's all you need. And even if you have all of the intelligence in the world, you can go broke. But not only does it happen with money, it happens pretty often, where ordinary people with good behavior outperform extremely educated people who don't have control over their emotions. But for ordinary people who are like, I'm just going to invest in my 401k and leave it alone for 30 years. I don't even know what my password is. I don't care. I don't know or care if somebody else outperformed me last quarter. I'm just going to do this and follow my goals. That's where the money's made. And to do well financially, you need an element of both. And they can be conflicting personalities of like a personality that says, I'm going to take a risk and swing for the fences and try to get this done. And I'm going to be a little bit scared and a little bit paranoid and be scared of debt. That you need both of those at the same time. But the kind of personality that you need to be a billionaire hedge fund manager is not the kind of personality who also says, that's enough. Maybe I should put a bunch of money in treasury bonds and take money off the table. Like they just don't, that's not the kind of person. And that's why I think like Elon Musk will either be a trillionaire or bankrupt. And at this point, it's much closer to trillionaire at this point. But if you looked at him 10 years ago, when he was not the richest man in the world, you could see that. Like this guy's either going to be the richest man in the world or he's going to go bankrupt very quickly here. There's two things to pick apart here. One is that we should not pretend in most parts of the country, particularly if you have kids, that $100,000 is a fortune. It's not, of course, what it used to be. When you're looking at your expenses, you got mortgage, car payment, whatever it might be. Taking care of future you needs to be near the top of that pack. And I think a lot of finance is understanding and like being kind to your future self, having empathy with who you're going to be 30 days from now, 30 years from now, and being really kind to that person and taking care of that person. One part of saving too is that I've always been a big saver, and I don't feel like I'm necessarily saving for the future. I don't feel like I'm saving money. I feel like I'm buying independence. I feel like every time I save money, I'm buying a little bit of independence, and I get benefit from that today. When I save money, it's not like, oh, this will help me 10 years from now, even though it will. That helps me tomorrow. If I can wake up and be like, I have a level of independence that I didn't before, that's going to give me control over my life. And I think that's ultimately what people want out of money is freedom and independence and the ability to wake up and just say, I can do what I want today and make my own choices and live my own life. I think it's a healthy, selfish motivation with money to say, like, I want my money to benefit and be a tool for happiness for myself and my immediate family. And that's about where the goals end. Because I think we always overestimate how much other people are paying attention to us. And so it's easy to tell ourselves, if I had this and that and this house and this car and these clothes, other people would give me a level of respect and admiration that they're not right now. And you always overestimate how much those people are actually thinking about you. These group of researchers put a woman in a very ugly sweater and sent her into a party. And she mingled about and she came out and they asked her, they said, how many people in the party do you think noticed your hideous sweater? And she's like, all of them. It was humiliating. And then they go in and ask people in the party, did you notice the woman in the ugly sweater? No, 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 no. Nobody's thinking about you as much as you are. And that goes for your ugly stuff, for your insecurities, and what you might think other people will really admire you for. And you should not pretend that the other people walking down the street, driving past you, care whatsoever. It's not quite black and white. Like, I want to fit into the social group that I choose. And to do that, I need to talk a certain way, dress a certain way. It's not to just ignore everybody and do your own thing, but we overestimate the benefit that we get from it. And I first started thinking about this when I was about 19. I was a valet at a 5-star hotel in Los Angeles. And when somebody drove into the hotel in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, I would stop and stare in admiration, but I never thought about the driver. What I would do is I would look at the car and I would say, if I was the driver one day, people will admire me. Nobody cares about the driver, but they want to be the driver because then they think people will care about them. We just overestimate the number of eyeballs that are on us. And once you come to terms with that game, you can be like, okay, well, how can I then use money rather than a useless tool to show off for other people who aren't paying attention, but as a tool to selfishly, in a good way, improve the circumstances and the happiness and the independence of the life for myself and my family and a small group of friends around me. What do my wife and kids and close friends hopefully admire about me? It's not the square footage of my house or the horsepower of my car. It's like, am I a good dad? Do I play football in the driveway with my son? Do I sit and play with toys with my daughter? Am I responsive and receptive to my friends and go out and have dinner and laugh for a couple hours? That's what they care about. Your ability to feel wealthy, to feel rich, to be financially independent is absolutely in your control. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, how much money you make, what your job is, you can do it. And I think we've told ourselves for generations that in order to become rich, you have to have the right educational background. You have to have the right career. You have to come from the right family. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how you think about money. It's about how you behave. And behavior is in everybody's control. An ordinary person who doesn't have a good education, maybe they didn't even graduate high school, let's say, but they have good financial behavior. They can think long term. They can keep their expectations in check. They're patient. They have those behavioral qualities. That person can do very well. But the person who went to Harvard and got an MBA and went to work on Wall Street has the best education, the best connections, the best experience. That person can easily go broke, and they do. Not uncommon for that to happen. And that is not true in other fields. It is impossible to think of an ordinary person who didn't go to high school, didn't go to college, performing open heart surgery better than a Harvard-trained doctor. That's impossible. That will never happen. But it does happen with money. because it's not about what you know. You don't need to know the secret formulas. You don't need to have secret connections. If you just get your behavior right and your thinking right, you can do well. Patience, keeping your expectations in check, not comparing yourself to other people, using money as a tool to live a better life instead of a yardstick to measure yourself against others by. It's very simple stuff, and it's all in your head. I think it's 99% of what people need to know to do well with money is in your control. It's not to say that they're easy, but they're simple. Just a couple of the behaviors. If you have an ability to focus internally on your own goals rather than constantly comparing yourself against others, if you can save a little bit of your money, live even slightly below your means, invest that money and be patient. I'm not talking private islands and private jets, but for most people, what they actually want, if you said, what is your ultimate financial goal? They would say, I want to have a stable housing for myself and my family. I want to have a little bit of cushion to fall back onto if I were to get laid off or have a medical emergency. I want to be able to have a dignified retirement someday. I want to be able to spend time with my kids. Those are very good financial goals. And that level of wealth and success, I think, is within everybody's control. It is so natural for everybody to compare yourself against others. For me to measure my level of success by not saying, what do I have? But by saying, what do I have relative to that guy? Not how comfortable is my house, but by saying, how big is my house relative to that person over there, to my neighbor, to my coworker, to my siblings. And so no matter how well you're doing, no matter how great your house is, no matter how much money you're making, you turn on Instagram 100 times a day like everybody else, you open it up, and there is somebody out there who looks better, happier, more successful, more beautiful than you are, because it's easier today than it's ever been to let your expectations just spiral out of control. People in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are falling behind relative to previous generations, particularly something like home ownership. It was more attainable in previous generations than it has been, particularly in the last couple of years. So empathy, this is not me saying, oh, you should just feel better. You should just be more grateful for what you have. You actually are doing fine. It's important to realize too that all happiness is just the gap between expectations and reality. You have the life you're living. You have the life you expect to live. In between there is where you can find some level of happiness. And the wider that gap is, the more miserable you're going to feel. This is not true for everybody. This is not black and white, where the reason that person has not been able to save as much as they thought is because their expectations for many years probably have been spiraling out of control. And they were spending more money than they should have been because they were trying to chase who they wanted to be, even if it wasn't necessarily the level of lifestyle that they could afford. And so they were renting an apartment that was very nice because they had an expectation that that's where they should be. And they were comparing themselves to other people, even if it was kind of out of their budget. They were traveling and dressing and eating out in a way because that's who they felt that they should be, looking in the mirror and being like, when have I been envious? When have my expectations spiraled out of control? No one is immune to this. What happens with expectations for a lot of people is, look, if I said, I want to be a 10% better dad, that's a good goal. But what does that mean? What does that even mean? How do I track that? How do I measure? That's impossible. But if I said, I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment and I want a 2-bedroom apartment, that makes sense. If I said, I want 3 new pairs of jeans, that's easy to wrap your head around. Money is so quantifiable. It's so easy to just say, right now I'm making $20 an hour. I want to get to 25. That it becomes this thing where we chase money because it's so easy to measure. And we chase spending because it's so easy to contextualize. And so if you don't have a good idea of what a good life looks like, a good life is one in which I have more money, because it's so much easier to understand than how can I become a better dad? How can I be a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend, a better worker? That's hard to wrap your head around. And so we chase money because it's so easy to wrap our heads around. And we chase it with the idea that it's the solution to all of our problems, even if it can solve some problems, but not the biggest ones. The hole that you're trying to fill, the psychological hole that you're trying to fill, is probably not going to be filled with money. It's not necessarily that these things will make you happier. If you were to have more money, it's not necessarily that you would be happier. And that when most people think, oh, if only I had a bigger house, then I'd be happy. And when you imagine yourself taking a fancy vacation, you imagine how happy you would be. The emotion that you're actually thinking about is not happiness, it's contentment. If I imagine myself in Hawaii with my kids next year. And I'm just envisioning that in my head. I can come up with this emotion inside and be like, oh, that would be great. I would be so happy with that. Right. But actually the emotion that I'm envisioning is being content with that. It's being in Hawaii and saying, this is enough. This is all I want. I don't